Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Caitlin and on this channel I upload all sorts of content relating to true crime, education and psychology related topics. So if that sounds like something you'd enjoy and you haven't already, then please do hit that subscribe button and don't forget to turn on your little notification bell so you know whenever I upload a new video. So for today's video we're going to be discussing the case of KATARZYNA ZOWADA's death, but before we get started discussing the details of the case, I just want to zoom through my usual disclaimer that I like to include at the start of all my videos, just letting you guys know that I'm not claiming to be an expert in this case or any of the other cases that I cover over on my channel. I'm simply relaying the information I'm able to find myself through research of certain sources on the internet, and because only certain sources are accessible to me, it means I may get things wrong, leave things out or mispronounce things. I apologise if I do any of those things. I'm not trying to cause anyone any harm or an injustice. I'm simply working with the information that I have available to me. So with all that being said, let's just get started discussing the case of KATARZYNA ZOWADA. The KATARZYNA's case begins in Krakow in Poland in 1998 when KATARZYNA ZOWADA was just 23 years old. KATARZYNA was studying at the Jagiellonian University in Krakow, and when the authorities had spoken to her friends, they'd all said that she was a very nice young woman, although she was described as being sad and withdrawn a lot of the time. She was known to have suffered with depression following the death of her father 2 years prior to this, and although her friends had said that she was a happy young woman a lot of the time, they did know that she was having some issues relating to her mental health as of recently. In terms of her studies, when she first joined the university, she was studying psychology, but after just one semester she changed to a history course for a short while, but not long after this she then changed again to religious studies. On the 12th of November in 1998, 23-year-old KATARZYNA had plans with her mother to meet her at a psychiatric clinic in Nauheita, but this is where she had at the time been receiving treatment for her diagnosed depression, but she'd never arrived at the clinic to meet her mother for her appointment. Her mother did know that this was particularly unusual, and later that day, when she'd still heard nothing from her daughter, she'd attempted to file a missing persons report with the local authorities. In response, however, the local police department had told her that she should just wait a little bit longer before filing an official report, as they had no other reason to suspect she was missing. But despite this, there remained no sign of KATARZYNA ZOWADA. KATARZYNA remained a missing person until January the 6th of 1999, when a discovery was made that changed the case entirely. Crew on a tugboat on the Vistula, a large river in Poland, had noticed that something had gotten caught in the propeller of their boat at some point in the previous day. It wasn't entirely unusual for things to get caught from inside the water, and a crew member had intended on just going down and removing whatever it had been that had caused the blockage. He noticed that whatever it was that had been caught had been radiating this pungent smell, and it was pale in colour, but upon a closer inspection he realised that what was caught in the propeller had actually been a human ear. Once the authorities were called in to investigate the finding, they soon began discovering other parts of this set of remains. Because of the state in which the remains were discovered, they'd initially believed that the body of this unidentified victim had been torn apart by a ship that had come into contact with it while it was floating along this river. They soon realised that they hadn't actually discovered an entire set of human remains, but rather just human skin, suggesting that the victim had been skinned alive. They determined that the skin of the torso had been intentionally removed, as well as the limbs and head having been removed, as though whoever was responsible had been making a skin suit. It was believed that what was left of these remains had been in the river for a few weeks prior to the discovery, and tests later confirmed that they had belonged to missing 23-year-old KATARZYNA ZOWADA. A few days later, on the 14th of January, authorities had discovered a right leg and pieces of clothing known to have belonged to KATARZYNA in this same river. However, despite the authorities' best attempts to search this river for more evidence, a number of her limbs and her head remained missing. Authorities and the public alike had been entirely shaken by the knowledge of the way in which these remains had been found, and because of this, the FBI and a number of other investigative organisations from other countries were also called in to aid the investigation. First suspect in the case had been a man named Vladimir W, and this had been because he was found to have committed the murder of his father in May of 1999. Vladimir had not only killed the victim, but he'd also made a mask from the skin of his father's head and had been seen wearing it. And because of the similarity in the nature of these murders, he was considered a likely suspect in KATARZYNA's murder. But it was soon determined that the authorities had no evidence to connect him to this crime specifically, but Vladimir did end up being sentenced to 25 years in prison for the murder of his father. In the same year, a man who was known to regularly walk in the area of the Vistula River had been considered a suspect in the case. He was reported to have been rather outspoken with his disliking of women in general, and so many people in the area had believed he was someone who had strong enough emotions to act out aggressively towards women, but he was ultimately cleared from the suspect list. Around a year after this point, the case of KATARZYNA's murder was listed as officially cold because of there being such a lack of evidence pointing them to a specific killer. In the year of 2000, it was also announced that the DNA of another person had been discovered and collected on the remains, and in 2012 the investigation was officially reopened. In more recent re-examinations of the details of the case, the authorities had been able to determine that the killer had used an extremely sharp tool to cut around the areas of the neck, the armpit and the groin, and had likely done so with the intention of causing the victim pain. And following the case being reopened in 2012, the remains were exhumed. A number of plants and fibres were found on the remains, and professional botanists had confirmed the plant samples found on the remains had not been from an aquatic environment. This had been a finding that had conclusively told the authorities that the murder of KATARZYNA ZOWADA had not taken place in the area of the river where the remains were discovered. In 2014, FBI profilers pieced together a psychological profile of the perpetrator, stating that he would have had to display a number of sadistic behaviours to have been able to carry out such a brutal attack. And 2 years after this, investigators have been able to conclusively state that KATARZYNA had been tortured by her killer before her death, and it was also considered the possibility that the murderer may have been a butcher or a doctor by profession because of the means of the attack. In October of 2017, 19 years after the death of KATARZYNA ZOWADA, investigators had discovered a new piece of evidence that would prove to be vital in the case. A 52-year-old man named Robert J, a local resident, had been arrested in relation to KATARZYNA's murder. He had been described as a man who took pleasure in torturing and skinning animals and had a job working in a morgue, as well as previously having been in the military. He had a history of working in the Krakow Institute of Zoology, where he would watch the process of animals being skinned, and he was actually only employed here for a very short period of time, as he was found to have killed all of the rabbits in the institute in the space of one shift, leading to his immediate termination. Around the time of KATARZYNA's murder, there had been numerous reports of this same man having stalked and harassed a number of local women. And this particular man had allegedly fallen on the radar of the police when they'd received a letter from a friend of Robert, which had aroused their suspicion, although what had been said exactly on this letter has remained unknown to the public. He was known to have lived near the river in which her remains were found, and when the authorities had searched his home, they discovered blood in the bathroom. And the authorities had soon grown more suspicious of this man once they discovered that he kept a journal in which he'd written in detail about the murder of a young woman. It's believed that after the discovery of this journal, Robert J had confessed his devout religiosity, and allegedly not long after this, he had confessed to murdering KATARZYNA to a priest in confidence. It's known that prior to his arrest, he had a habit of visiting the gravesite where KATARZYNA was buried, which in hindsight was believed to have been out of some sick enjoyment. Following his arrest, a number of psychologists had attempted to piece together a psychological profile of Robert J in an attempt to understand why he did what he did. And they concluded that his acts of harassing women had pointed towards him showing sadistic tendencies, as well as it being known that he had a number of unusual behaviours pointing to such, including watching his neighbours through their windows and his enjoyment of torturing animals. Ultimately, this man was charged with aggravated murder with particular cruelty because of the nature of the attack on KATARZYNA ZOWADA. And from the sources that I could access, it appeared as though the 53-year-old man remained in jail awaiting trial. And aside from this, there just isn't a lot of other information to sort of fill in the gaps. So if anyone out there is a little bit more maybe directly linked to this case and has any more details on sort of more recent updates, then that would be fantastic. But for now, that is where I'm going to end the video on this case. If I do find any more updates on this case, of course I will update you guys as well. But as always, please do let me know your thoughts down below, and if you have any other case requests you'd like me to make videos on. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you found this interesting, and I'll see you guys very soon for another video. Thanks for watching. Bye.